Justice in the crosshairs. Power. Authority. Trust. These three pillars are supposed to hold society together. When they work in harmony, justice feels inevitable. When they collide, the fallout can shake an entire nation. This story is inspired by the kind of headline that makes people stop scrolling, reread twice, and feel their stomach tighten. Cop pulls over black judge and tasers her, now he's facing 7 years in prison. At first glance, it sounds unbelievable. A judge sworn to uphold the law, brutalized by someone sworn to enforce it. But as you'll soon discover, the truth behind moments like this is never simple, never clean, and never just about one traffic stop. This is not just a story about race. It's not just a story about police brutality. And it's not just a story about justice in a courtroom. It's a story about assumptions made in seconds that destroy lives for years. About a woman who fought her entire life to earn respect, only to have it stripped away in minutes on the side of a dark road. And about a man whose decision, fueled by fear, pride, and unchecked power, set off a chain of events he could never undo. As you listen, ask yourself one question. What happens when the law itself is mistaken for a threat? Stay with me through every moment, because this story builds slowly, hits hard, and ends in a way no one involved expected. Now, let's begin. Judge Elena Brooks had driven this road hundreds of times. The stretch of highway just outside Brookhaven was quiet at night, long, smooth asphalt framed by pine trees and silence. It was the kind of road where thoughts wandered freely. That night, Elena's mind wasn't on cases or court deadlines. It was on her daughter's upcoming college acceptance letters and the speech she'd been asked to give at a civil rights gala the following week. Her silver sedan moved at a steady speed. She hadn't noticed the police cruiser until the blue lights erupted behind her like a sudden storm. Her first instinct wasn't fear. It was confusion. She checked her speed. Legal. Her turn signal earlier. Clean. Her registration. Up to date. Still, she pulled over calmly, just as she'd instructed hundreds of defendants to do from the bench over the years. Elena rolled down her window and placed both hands on the steering wheel. She knew the rules. The officer approached slowly. His name badge read Officer Daniel Reese. He was young, maybe early 30s, and rigid in posture. His hand hovered near his holster longer than necessary. License and registration, he said sharply. Elena reached carefully for her purse. Officer, before I move, my license is in my bag on the passenger seat. Reese nodded, eyes scanning her interior like he was searching for danger. She handed over the documents. He looked at her license, then back at her face. Something changed. A flicker. Doubt. Suspicion. You live in Westwood Heights, he asked. Yes. That's a long way from here. I work in Brookhaven, she replied evenly. What do you do for work? Elena paused. I'm a judge. Circuit court. The silence that followed was thick, not respectful, not impressed, but tense. Reese let out a short laugh. A judge? Yeah, okay. Elena felt the first stirrings of discomfort. You can verify that. Reese stepped back, radioed something in, then returned. His tone colder now. Step out of the vehicle. Officer, Elena said calmly, may I ask why? I said step out of the vehicle. Years on the bench had taught Elena when to push and when to comply. She opened the door slowly and stepped out, keeping her hands visible. The night air felt suddenly hostile. Reese's voice rose. Turn around. Hands behind your back. For what reason? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. You're being uncooperative. That word hit her like a slap. I am complying, she said. I've done nothing wrong. Reese's jaw tightened. Last warning. Before Elena could speak again, Reese reached for her arm. Instinctively, she pulled back, not to resist, but from shock. That single movement changed everything. Stop resisting, he shouted. I'm not resisting. Elena cried. The world exploded in sound and pain. A crackle. A jolt. Her body locked as electricity tore through her muscles. Elena screamed as she collapsed to the pavement, her cheek scraping against gravel. The taser's current surged again, and again, stealing her breath, her dignity, her control. Passing cars slowed. Someone shouted, "What the hell are you doing?" Reese stood over her, chest heaving, weapon still drawn. "Stay down," he yelled. Tears streamed down Elena's face, not just from pain, but from humiliation. From disbelief. From the horrifying realization that nothing she said, not her education, not her title, not her obedience, had protected her. Backup arrived minutes later. When another officer recognized her name, everything shifted. "Wait. Brooks," the officer said quietly. "Judge Brooks?" Reese froze. An ambulance was called. Hands that had been rough suddenly became careful. Apologies were whispered but never fully spoken. At the hospital, Elena lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over. The taser marks would fade. The video would not. A bystander's phone had captured everything. By morning, the footage was everywhere. By nightfall, protests filled the streets. And by the end of the week, Officer Daniel Reese was suspended, then charged. 7 years in prison. But this was only the beginning. Because justice doesn't end when the sirens stop. It begins when the truth is forced into the light. The courtroom had never felt so small. Judge Elena Brooks sat on the wooden bench, but this time she was not elevated above anyone. There was no gavel in her hand. No seal of authority behind her head. Just a woman in a navy blue suit, shoulders straight, eyes steady, waiting to testify in a case that carried her own name. Brooks versus State. Outside, the courthouse steps were flooded with people. Protest signs clashed in the air like opposing arguments. Justice for Elena. Back the blue. No one is above the law. Inside, silence ruled. The kind of silence that carried weight, history, and consequence. Officer Daniel Reese sat at the defense table, jaw clenched, hands folded so tightly his knuckles had turned white. He hadn't slept well in months. The footage had followed him everywhere, on news channels, social media, even whispered in grocery store aisles. His face had become a symbol, a villain to some, a misunderstood officer to others. He had never imagined his career would end on a roadside at midnight. The prosecutor rose first. "Ms. Brooks," she said gently, "can you describe how that night has affected your life since the incident?" Elena inhaled slowly. "I've presided over sentencing hearings," she said. "I've listened to victims. I've told defendants that actions have consequences. But nothing prepared me for waking up in fear of flashing lights. Nothing prepared me for realizing that everything I worked for could be erased in seconds, because someone decided I was a threat." Her voice never broke. That made it worse. She described the nightmares. The pain. The moment her daughter asked, "Mom, why did the police hurt you?" Jurors avoided Reese's eyes. The defense attorney stood next, pacing slowly. "Judge Brooks," he began, "you understand police procedure, correct?" "Yes. And you know that sudden movements during a traffic stop can be interpreted as resistance?" Elena nodded once. "I also know the difference between resistance and reflex." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The defense tried to frame fear. Stress. A young officer making a mistake in a dangerous job. Then the video played again. Every second was dissected. The pause after she said she was a judge. The change in Reese's tone. The taser firing, not once, but twice. The jury watched in dead silence. By the third day, public opinion was split wide open. Some argued Reese was being sacrificed to appease outrage. Others said 7 years wasn't enough. But the law doesn't bend to noise. It bends to evidence. And the evidence was unforgiving. When Reese took the stand, his voice shook. "I didn't know who she really was," he said. "I felt threatened." The prosecutor leaned in. "By a woman standing still with her hands visible?" Reese swallowed. "I thought she was lying." "Because she was black?" the prosecutor asked plainly. The question hit like thunder. Reese hesitated too long. I don't know," he finally said. That hesitation sealed his fate. The verdict. The jury deliberated for 11 hours. When they returned, no one breathed. On the charge of aggravated assault under color of law. Guilty. Elena closed her eyes. On the charge of unlawful use of force. Guilty. Reese's shoulders collapsed. The judge, a colleague of Elena's who had recused himself emotionally but not legally, delivered the sentence with measured restraint. Officer Daniel Reese, he said, you were entrusted with authority. You abused it. The court sentences you to 7 years in state prison. A gasp echoed through the courtroom. Reese was led away in cuffs, the same sound he had heard so many others endure. Outside, the crowd erupted. Some cried. Some cheered. Some stood in stunned silence. Elena watched from a distance. There was no victory in her eyes. After the storm. Months passed. Elena returned to the bench, but she was different. She listened longer. She questioned more deeply. She ruled with the same fairness, but with sharper awareness. She mandated body camera reviews. She pushed for de-escalation training. She spoke nationally about accountability, not with anger, but with resolve. Reese, behind prison walls, had time to think. To replay the moment again and again. In interviews, he admitted what he never had before. I wasn't trained to question my fear. I acted before I thought. And someone else paid the price. The story didn't end neatly. It never does. But it changed policy. It changed conversations. And it reminded a nation of a hard truth. Authority without accountability is not safety, it is danger. And justice? Justice is not automatic. It must be demanded. Defended. And sometimes, survived. Final message to viewers. If this story made you feel something, anger, sadness, reflection, or hope, then it did its job. Stories like this matter because they remind us that power must be questioned, truth must be protected, and justice must apply to everyone. Don't forget to like this video if it impacted you. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful, real-life, inspired stories that challenge, inspire, and open our eyes. Because the next story might be closer to home than you think.